This is a very ugly, mean question. It's very confusing the way that the sentence is worded, and it's hard to know even what they want from us. So my advice for this one is, let's just zoom in on the sentence for a second and try to understand what's going on. It starts off with a very terrible intro. It is by no means something. So we've got this weird kind of phrasing and negativity in this. So I'm going to just put this aside for a second. Let's ignore this. Let's focus on the ideas that we do understand, because we have a blank here, right? So we don't even know what really is going on. The next piece is to recognize the influence of Dutch painter Hieronymus Bosch on Ali Banisadr's paintings. Okay, so Bosch influenced Banisadr. Okay. Indeed, Banisadr himself cites Bosch as an inspiration. So notice, Bosch inspired Banisadr. I don't know how to say these names. So the two things that we understand here are clearly agreeing with each other. So I'm going to express this idea with a double positive, right? We have a statement, and then the second thing is agreeing with it, right? So I'm just going to say they're both positive statements, right? Someone influences someone else. I guess that's a good thing. So there you go. Now the next piece, however, some scholars have suggested that the ancient Mesopotamian poem Epic of Gilgamesh may have had a far greater impact on Banisadr's work. To be quite honest, this is only here to confuse you. Obviously, the however is implying some sort of negative, right? But this has nothing really to do with the way that the other sentence was constructed. In fact, we kind of wrapped up the idea. They're like, okay, we think that that Bosch influenced Banisadr, and that's what Banisadr himself says. So it seems to just be kind of like a complete thought. And so for this reason, I think we just can kind of ignore this next sentence, this however. I don't see how this helps. Now, when we start including the words themselves, I have a lot of trouble understanding what should go in that blank. It is by no means substantial, satisfying, unimportant, appropriate. It's very confusing. So what I do to help myself here is I start to classify the words just based on connotation. So satisfying and appropriate, we hopefully know are positive words, and unimportant is a negative. Substantial is a little trickier. I would say that that's probably positive or neutral, because if something has substance, if it's substantial, it's got worth, it's got weight to it. So it's probably a positive word. So just kind of by well, one of these things is not like the others, maybe choice C is right. But let's try to understand how it's going to fit. We're trying to get across that there's a repetition of ideas, the two positive ideas. But this intro part has a negative word, right? It is by no means. So use some math skills here. If you wanted to get a positive idea across, you would need two negatives to make a positive. Okay, right? So it is by no means, in this case, unimportant to recognize the influence of Dutch painter Hieronymus. They're saying it's not unimportant, meaning it is important. It is important to recognize the influence that Bosch has on Banisadr, because Banisadr says Bosch is one of my influences. So it's the reason I didn't like this question, and obviously you can tell just by how long this explanation has been going, is this sentence was constructed in a very strange way to make a very obvious point, right? We are saying, yes, someone should recognize the connection between these two artists because the artist himself recognizes that connection. It's two sentences that agree with each other. Yet the phrasing of the initial part of this is kind of this weird double negative that we sometimes do in English. Good writers, I don't think, do it this way, but this is what the SAT was going for here. So this is a very difficult question, in my opinion, because it's so hard to kind of wrap your head around what the point is. But it does make sense. If it were me, I would say something more like, it is by no means inappropriate to recognize this influence, right? I think inappropriate would have been a better fit. And notice why that maybe comes to my mind is that the positive word appropriate is there. So it's weird because, again, I don't think anyone who's trying to make a clear point would ever write their sentence in this way, and yet this is exactly how the SAT presented it. So look out for double negatives, use connotations to help you when things get really weird and you're trying to understand how negative words impact what's being said.